the very first episode of Off the Grid, a podcast where we go over this fantastic novel, My Side of the Mountain, by Jean Craighead George.
Your hosts for this podcast are Jacob, Sarah, Dylan, and me, Taytum.
I'm Dylan, I love Western books.
I'm Taytum, and I love mystery books.
I'm Jacob, and I love adventure and science fiction books. This book, I think, will be one of
We will be summarizing the first 6 chapters of My Side of the Mountain, starting with the first and second chapters. In the first chapter of this thrilling novel, we are brought to present day in Sam's life, and he witnesses his first snowstorm in the Catskill Mountains. This took place on December 4th. Sam reminisces about his father and how he had said that the mountain was no place for a gribbly. In the second chapter, we are taken back to the past, where Sam tells the story of his first few days off the grid and how it came about. Sam leaves his crowded NYC home for a life on the Catskill Mountain, where he learns to make hooks for fishing and catch fish. Sam also learns of the importance of shelter building and location, when he meets a mountain man named Bill, who teaches him how to build a fire.
In this third chapter, Sam bids Bill farewell and takes to the road. He journeys to Delhi, which took him 3 car rides to get to. Upon arriving in Delhi, he immediately makes his way to the library, where he hopes to find the key to locating his great-grandfather's property. The librarian, Miss Turner, aids Sam and searches her library for a map of the Gribbly land. She sketches a map for Sam, which he follows and finds his great-grandfather's land. As soon as he arrived, he got right to finding food and fished up a catfish. She also made himself a nice fire. In the light of the fire, he writes a letter to Bill, which he never ends up sending, as he doesn't know Bill's last name. The meal he cooks up for himself is delightful. He says that the catfish is the best thing he's ever eaten. The next morning, he sees a flock of birds feasting on a tree and recalls back to the nature guide he read that birds can determine whether something is edible or non-edible. He contemplates finding whatever they're eating, but abandons that idea and heads down to the river instead, where he catches himself some mussels. He heads back and scours the land to see if he can find anything. Then he wanders across the old foundation of the Gribbly's house. He searches around for any metals or things that could aid him, however, does not find anything. He continues to look about the property and finds himself a marsh full of cattails and arrowleaf, something he thinks will make a good meal. Sam later wanders upon a meadow, and there is where he found a hemlock forest. But one tree in particular caught his eye, the biggest hemlock tree, and seeing this tree gave him an idea.
In chapter 5, Sam Gribbly wants a house that is hidden from the people who hike and wander in his part of the mountain in summer. He circles his massive tree, looking for a suitable spot to build his home. He can't build up a tree because the branches are too far up, but he finds a cavity between 2 roots going beneath the tree. He looks inside to find the tree has rotting insides. He begins digging up the insides with his hand and his axe. It takes too much time and stops and Dylan sit down comfortably in the tree. As Sam is sitting there, he reflects on how he always plans improperly, always building without enough food to keep his energy up, and then not having enough energy to get food. When he finally gets he stumbles across a spring and delightfully hops in to wash all the dirt and rotting wood off, only to find freezing cold water. On his way back, he finds edible flowers, dandelion roots, and crow eggs for him to make a salad-type lunch. As he is boiling the eggs on a leaf, he has a great idea to use controlled fire to burn the inside of the tree, and miraculously finds a small spring hidden between 2 boulders right next to the tree. In chapter 6, it is 5 oxygen tune on Sam's aspen pole, working fit. After many nights of being soaked by the rain is when Sam finally completed his house, with enough for him to stand, sit, and lay down in. He was cutting ash trees into thin pieces to start making his bed. And trash and snare set was catching food much easier. As Sam worked, he saw a raccoon who had his eyes trained on something in the forest. As Sam continued working, a little old lady appeared and asked Sam what he was doing up that pole alone. Sam replied that he lived there, and the woman didn't take him seriously and took him to beg Sam strawberry patch with her. After picking, she takes him back toward the town deli, where Sam sees a falcon flying around. When he gets deli, he makes an excuse to go to the library so the wind will leave him alone. He goes to the library and finds a librarian, Miss Turner, who helped him before with their maps, fighting for everything they had about falcons.
So in the podcast, when it came to the clarifying the confusing parts, one of the confusing parts that I found was when Sam Gribley has a falcon as a pet. And I was very confused because these are generally very vicious birds, and I was just very confused about this.
And I wouldn't assume they're like easy to make a pet, especially in the wild.
No, but it is possible. Actually, you can see a falcon for a certain effect.
But could you imagine the scratches he'd have on his body? Because usually if you were to train a falcon in like a zoo or something, you'd have all the equipment, right?
Yeah,
It could have been he sees a falcon and he's like, I want that. I want that to be my pet now.
Yeah, I'm not sure where his mind went there, but
I don't know that mindset, but I mean,
whatever you want, I guess.
I guess it's a companion, when you're out on a mountain alone. You want something, I guess.
but then wouldn't you have to feed the falcon too, and then that would take up your food supply?
Yeah, I guess there are pros and cons about having a falcon as a pet.
I'm just confused about, oh, well, now he has a falcon. It kind of came out of the blue, like there's no real explanation for it,
Yeah.
So it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks about the reading. I'm like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, another thing that caught me in the beginning of our reading was the time spot now. It's like we talked, I thought we were already starting it. I was confused that we started already at his house for the first chapter. The second chapter, we were already jumped back into him not knowing anything about mountains.
Yeah, I thought that the book would start out where Sam's adventure started out, because in the second chapter, I was so confused about him leaving New York again. I'm like, haven't you already been living in the mountains?
Yeah, I kind of just jumped around. Like,
It was a little bit, that was the most confusing part for me. I didn't understand much.
it's like he's fully set up, and then all of a sudden he's like back at square one again, and it's like, okay, well,
Once I started reading the book a little bit more, I realized that the first chapter was basically to draw you in to see him well established, and then the other chapters were basically going in chronological order.
going back to
When I read that, after reading that chapter, I read the back of the book and he captures it in a journal, so
Yeah, then it made more sense once I had looked back.
Journey or whatever. I was most confused about where did the strawberry patch come from? It described everything he found, basically, but then all of a sudden he has a strawberry patch now. I think it would have been
from everything else, and then, all of a sudden there's a strawberry patch. What is that?
strawberries now.
It would have been better if the author hadn't described it as Sam's strawberry patch. I think it would be better if she had described it as, oh, well, there's a strawberry patch, that should be mine, not somebody from the city. I think that should have been a better representation.
Yeah, like, all of a sudden he was just had a strawberry patch now.
Yeah, that was odd.
It was odd. It was
a bad explaining.
Yeah, very bad.
Yeah, because it explained everything else he found, and then there's just didn't say anything about the strawberry patch,
Yeah.
But I think that's all the questions we have for today. So thank you for joining us for another one of our podcasts.
Is that summer calling? Yes, it is. And that means the grilling season is here. Come check out our wide variety of options here at Home Hardware. Drop in and check out the latest Traeger model on sale for only $1,400. Never burn a meal again with Traeger. Equip yourself for summer with the perfect grill to kick off the season. All here at Home Hardware, home of the handyman.
The first few chapters, it definitely gave me a hatchet feel to it. I could connect the two stories together very well. I felt that as I read the two books, Brian and Sam almost sounded like the same. Both surviving in the wild, both isolated from society. The only difference I found was that Brian never wanted to be in the wild and had to sometimes find out how to do things himself. And Sam wanted to be alone in the wild and research everything he would have needed to know. What do you guys think?
This is actually the first connection that I thought of, actually. I wanted to read this book because I really love Hatchet. I thought that I could connect to Brian a bit better than Sam because I'm not a very outdoor-oriented person. And I would have had to learn everything as I went along, not like Sam, who got the chance to research. I not only see a connection between the characters, but also in their writing style. Gary Paulson and Jean Craighead George both explain the adventure in very full detail.
There are shows that are similar to this book as well, like Alone or Alaskan Bush People. Both My Side of the Mountain and Alaskan Bush People, they chose to live a life off the grid and in the wilderness. They use the wilderness to survive and avoid going into towns. They only go into civilization when they need to. That's the connection I thought of.
And a world-touch connection I found is COVID. Sam Gribley is isolated from society, and he tries to avoid people. And in this day and age, it's not uncommon for us to avoid people. And we have laws in place keeping us from society, essentially. More specifically, isolated like Sam was.
And I also found another comparison in, well, more similarity, is Sam was self-isolating from the world, much like we call it when we have to quarantine due to a close contact, like all the people in my group had to quite recently.
This story also kind of reminds me when I used to go camping. We used to go out west, far enough that it would take like over an hour to get to the nearest town. Although we had campers and supplies, unlike Sam, it was still a similar wilderness experience. We used to make our own little shelters out of sticks and rope. We would even make ourselves stick beds covered in moss.
Also, the camping story reminds me of when in the book Sam dives into the really cold water. This sparked my memory on a holiday that my family took to BC, and I went swimming in the ocean, and we all know that the ocean in BC is very cold, and it was a really cloudy day, and I almost froze.
Now, what do you guys think about Sam Gribley's character structure in the book?
There isn't really much to Sam's character. All we really know is he's from a crowded home in New York City, and he ran away. There's really no detail. We don't even have the slightest clue what he looks like. And as far as personality goes, he's kind of a dry character, honestly. There's more description about the landscape than about the actual main character.
True. And I don't like the way that the author doesn't describe how Sam looks, and all we have is a picture of him on the front cover, but no real detail about it. But I do like the way that he has a natural curiosity for nature. And he also has a way of using trial and error to overcome tasks that no unprepared New York boy would be ready to take on.
I think that Sam was a flimsy character. He needed to be better thought out. I have found that before I write a story, I imagine the characters first, and then build the actions to follow. Therefore, the actions and the plots make sense. We don't know enough about Sam to understand the actions he progresses to do.
So, now what do you think about the author's works here, like how she writes?
I personally do not enjoy Jean's writing style for various reasons. For one, I feel that she over-explains the more prominent aspects of the novel. I would have loved to see some of Sam's emotional state showed and less about the hemlock trees. An author should make the reader appreciate the characters and their distinct personality traits.
Okay. Good point. What about you, Taylor?
I don't really like the way the book is formatted either. It almost seems kind of like a list. It's a step-by-step. It's like I'm reading instructions or something. There could be more storytelling rather than Sam did this and he went and did that.
That's another good point. Really good point. Now, do you guys think that she could have made the book any better in a way?
Yes, I believe she could have made the story better in small ways and larger ways. The not-so-obvious jumps in the time frame creates reading fatigue, where you don't really feel like engaging in the story anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it jumps around a lot and it's easy to get lost. I end up confused most of the time. Storytelling would have made this book more enjoyable for me to read personally. I think it would have made it seem less like instructions and it would be more attention-grabbing.
Yeah, I think the time jumps got really confusing for me too, jumping from the present to the past and reading like manual. But what did you like and dislike about the book?
I really did like the author's rich language and how she paints a scene with smooth language, though she tended to over-explain, which made me appreciate the language less.
There were a lot of over-explaining things that really didn't need to be explained in such detail, and then there were times where I felt like there wasn't enough detail. It was very sporadic. I felt like there were many things that I was missing. I felt kind of out of the loop in his whole adventure.
And that's a wrap for episode 1 of Off the Grid.
Thank you, viewers, for listening to our first podcast.
I hope you enjoyed.
Hopefully you'll tune in to our next episode where we go over the next section of Sam Gribley's adventure. Thank you.